Okay, so what if I told you that a simple pill could help heal one of the most stubborn and painful medical conditions out there? It sounds almost too good to be true, right? Well, today we're diving deep into the science behind a medication that might just be the key to treating chronic leg ulcers. First things first, what exactly are we talking about here? A venous leg ulcer. This isn't just a simple cut or a scrape. No, this is a persistent, open wound that just refuses to heal. It's usually on the lower leg, and it sticks around because the veins aren't doing their job correctly. They're struggling to get blood back up to the heart. It's actually the most severe form of something called chronic venous insufficiency. And this is a huge problem. I mean, we're not just talking about the awful impact it has on a patient's quality of life, which is bad enough. The economic burden is just staggering. In the UK alone, the cost to the National Health Service is estimated to be over £2 billion every single year. You can see why finding treatments that actually work is so critical.
So, here's how we're going to break it all down today. First, we'll get a handle on the problem itself. Then, we'll introduce this potential pill-based solution and see how researchers pieced all the evidence together. We'll look at the final verdict on healing, but then, and this is important, we'll uncover what the research missed, and finally, talk about what comes next.
All right, let's kick things off by digging a little deeper into why these ulcers are such a nightmare for both patients and their doctors. You know, the heart of the issue is this. These things affect up to 2% of the population, which is a lot of people. And the real difficulty boils down to two key phrases: delayed healing and high recurrence. The sores just don't want to close, and even when they finally do, they have a nasty habit of coming right back. It creates this incredibly frustrating and painful cycle for patients. Which brings us to a potential helper, a medication called Pentoxifylline. So the question is, could a simple pill really make a difference where so many other treatments struggle? Now here's a really crucial point. Pentoxifylline isn't meant to replace the gold standard treatment, which is compression therapy, those special bandages or stockings. Instead, it's being looked at as an add-on. It's something you take alongside compression to hopefully speed up the whole healing process. So how do we figure out if it actually works? Well, researchers conducted what's called a systematic review and meta-analysis. That sounds super technical, I know, but think of it like a massive detective investigation. They're gathering all the existing clues, in this case, all the previous studies, to see if they can finally solve the case. And believe me, they started with a huge pool of potential evidence. Their first search, which covered more than 4 decades of research, dug up 504 different studies that might hold the answers they were looking for. But finding the real answer isn't as simple as just counting them up. There's a super rigorous process. First, they screened all 504 of those studies to see if they were even relevant. Then, they took a hard look at the ones that were left, assessing them for quality and any risk of bias. And finally, they took the data from only the absolute best, most reliable studies and combined it to get a single, powerful result. So after all that sifting and filtering, how many studies actually made the final cut? Just 10. Yep, out of more than 500 to start with, only 10 were considered strong enough to be included in the final analysis. That just shows you how serious this process is. All right, we've walked through the whole process. Now it's time for the main event. What did these 10 studies, when you put them all together, actually say about pentoxifylline's power to heal these incredibly stubborn ulcers? The results were pretty striking, actually. When the researchers pooled all the data, they found that 62% of patients who got pentoxifylline had their ulcers heal completely. Now, that was significantly higher than the healing rate for the folks who got a placebo or just compression therapy alone. The researchers' own conclusion really sums it up perfectly. They said that taking pentoxifylline was, and I'm quoting here, associated with a significantly higher likelihood of complete ulcer healing. Now, on the surface, that sounds like a total slam dunk, but in science, the headline is never the full story.
And that brings us to the fine print, the but. What did this massive analysis not tell us? Because this is where things get really, really interesting. Look, for anyone who has finally gotten one of these ulcers to heal, there's one question that's bigger than any other. Is it going to come back? Healing is fantastic, but preventing it from returning, that's the real holy grail. And right here is the single biggest hole in the evidence. The rate of ulcer recurrence, which is arguably the most important outcome for patients in the long run, was not recorded in any of the 10 studies. Let that sink in.
We know pentoxifylline seems to help ulcers heal, but we have absolutely no data from this review on whether it helps keep them away for good.
And the uncertainty doesn't stop there. The studies themselves were all pretty different from one another, a problem scientists call high heterogeneity, which makes the combined result just a little less certain. Plus, a lot of these were older trials with a higher risk of bias. And maybe most critically, none of them mentioned if patients were also getting modern surgical treatments, like endovenous ablation, which we know can make a huge difference.
Okay, so we've got these promising but clearly incomplete results. Where do we go from here? What do we need to do to get a clear, definitive answer for patients and for doctors?
So let's recap where we stand. On one hand, pentoxifylline is a pretty low-risk, easy-to-get drug that really seems to give healing a boost. But on the other hand, we have these massive gaps in what we know. We have no idea if it prevents recurrence, we don't know how it plays with modern surgery, and we can't really calculate its true cost-effectiveness without that recurrence data.
The researchers who did this review are crystal clear about what has to happen next. They're calling for large-scale, high-quality, randomized controlled trials, or RCTs, which are the absolute gold standard of medical evidence, and, crucially, with a long enough follow-up period to actually track whether or not those ulcers come back.
And that leaves us with this final, really fascinating question. You've got an old, accessible drug, a painful, persistent, and expensive problem. The evidence we have is promising, but it's flawed. So could it be that we are just one single, really well-designed study away from completely changing the standard of care for millions of people? The answer, it seems, is still out there, just waiting to be discovered.